My son smiled while handing me a crumpled $15 bill across the kitchen counter, then told me not to spend it all in one place. 10 minutes earlier, I had watched him surprise his mother in law with two first class tickets to Paris for Mother's Day. I stood there holding that little bill in my hand while everyone at the table clapped for her, and not one person looked at me. I folded the bill once and slipped it into my purse, like it was something important. I don't know why. Maybe because if I left it sitting there on the counter, somebody might have noticed how insulting it was. My son Daniel was busy pouring champagne for his wife's family like he was hosting a television commercial instead of a backyard cookout in Tulsa. "Mom, you okay?" he asked without really looking at me. "I'm fine," I said. His mother-in-law, Francine, wrapped both arms around him and kissed his cheek. "Nobody's ever done anything this sweet for me," she said loud enough for the whole table to hear. His wife, Melissa, laughed. "Well, Daniel spoils the people he loves." That landed exactly how she intended. I sat there smiling with my hands folded in my lap while the rest of them talked about Paris hotels and river cruises. My potato salad was still sitting untouched in the kitchen. Nobody had even remembered to put it out. At one point, Melissa leaned toward me and said, "Oh, and thank you for the grocery casserole dish. We'll return it eventually." The grocery casserole dish. That's what she called the ceramic pan I'd cooked every Thanksgiving dinner in since 1989. I nodded like it didn't sting. The worst part wasn't even the money. Lord knows I didn't need Daniel buying me plane tickets. I'm 74 years old. I still live in the same little brick house my husband and I paid off 30 years ago. I don't care about luxury, but humiliation has a sound to it. It sounds like people laughing while pretending not to notice you've been reduced to an afterthought. I helped clean up after dinner because Melissa disappeared upstairs with her mother to look at travel outfits. Daniel stayed outside drinking bourbon with his father-in-law. Not once did he ask if I needed help carrying things. I was scraping plates into the trash when I heard Melissa talking in the hallway. "She'll probably ask us for money again eventually," she whispered. Francine laughed softly. "Then give her another $15. They both laughed after that. I stood there gripping a paper plate so hard my fingers bent it in half. I hadn't asked Daniel for $1 in my life. Not when Harold died. Not when the hospital bills came. Not when my roof leaked during that terrible storm 3 winters ago. I worked part-time at a church thrift store until I was 72, just to stay afloat quietly. But upstairs in that hallway, they'd already turned me into some sad old burden they could joke about. Later that night, Daniel walked me to my car, holding a fresh drink in his hand. "You heading out already?" he asked. "It's getting late." He nodded. "Drive careful." That was it. No hug. No Happy Mother's Day. Nothing. I opened the car door, but before I got inside, Melissa stepped onto the porch behind him. "Oh, wait," she called sweetly. "Daniel forgot to tell you." I turned around. She smiled with that polished little smile she always used when she was about to say something cruel in a polite voice. "We may need your garage cleared out soon. Daniel said you still have some of his father's old things stored there." I blinked at her. "Why?" Daniel looked uncomfortable suddenly. Melissa answered for him. "Well, because we might need somewhere for Francine to stay when they remodel her condo next year." I stared at my son for a second, honestly thinking I'd misunderstood her. "My garage?" I said quietly. Melissa folded her arms. "Well, it's mostly old junk in there anyway, right?" Daniel finally spoke. Mom, it would only be temporary. Temporary. That word has a way of becoming permanent when families start circling around something they want. Harold's workbench was in that garage, his fishing rods, his army footlocker, boxes filled with old photographs Daniel himself hadn't looked at in 20 years. But suddenly they needed the space for Melissa's mother, not me. Her. I looked directly at Daniel. You already offered my garage to somebody. He rubbed the back of his neck like I was making things difficult. It just makes sense. Francine's condo renovation could take months. And where exactly did you expect me to put your father's things? Melissa answered before he could. Well, honestly, Evelyn, maybe this is a good time to downsize altogether. There it was, not even hidden anymore. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Daniel glanced at her quickly. Mel, but she kept going. We've all been worried about you living alone anyway. The house is getting older, the yard's too much work, and with prices the way they are now. She smiled softly. You could probably get a really good amount for the property. Property, not home. Property. I looked at my son again, waiting for him to shut it down, waiting for him to say, That's enough. Instead, he sighed tiredly. We're just trying to think ahead, Mom. I nodded slowly, then got into my car before either of them could see my face crack. The drive home felt longer than usual. Tulsa looked different at night, when your own child had just spoken to you like you were standing in the way of his future. I drove past the pharmacy Harold used to stop at every Friday after work, past the diner where Daniel begged for pancakes as a little boy, past the church where I sat through every single one of his school Christmas programs. I kept hearing Melissa's voice, downsize altogether. When I got home, the porch light was still on from where I'd left it earlier. The house smelled faintly like lavender cleaner and old wood. Safe. Familiar. I sat at the kitchen table without turning any lights on. Then I opened my purse and took out that $15 bill. I stared at it a long time. Finally, I started crying. Not loudly, just quietly into my hands like old women do when they've spent years learning not to inconvenience anybody with their pain. The next morning, Daniel called before 9. Mom, you okay? You left kind of abruptly. I was tired. There was a pause. So, about the garage thing, I waited. We could come by next weekend and help organize everything, he said carefully. Maybe rent a storage unit for some of the older stuff. Some of the older stuff. Like Harold's life could fit into a storage locker beside Christmas decorations and broken lamps. I'm not moving your father's things, I said. Another pause. Then his voice changed slightly, colder. You're being emotional about this. I almost laughed. After 48 years of motherhood, after sacrificing vacations, sleep, money, my marriage at times, now I was emotional because I didn't want strangers taking over my dead husband's space. I need to go, I told him. Mom, I said I need to go. I hung up. About an hour later, my neighbor Ruth knocked on my back door holding banana bread wrapped in foil. She stopped talking the second she saw my face. What happened? I tried brushing it off. I really did. But somehow, we ended up sitting at my kitchen table with coffee while I told her everything, every ugly little part. Ruth listened quietly. Then she said something that made my stomach turn cold. Evelyn, has Daniel ever asked you about the deed to the house? I looked up slowly. Yes, I said. When? I swallowed hard. 3 weeks ago. Ruth sat back slowly after I told her. And what exactly did he ask? She said. I could still remember the conversation word for word because something about it had bothered me even then. Daniel had come over on a rainy Thursday carrying takeout containers and acting unusually attentive. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. Asked about my blood pressure medication. Talked about making sure everything was protected. Then he casually mentioned probate. Honestly, Mom, if something happened to you unexpectedly, the house could get tied up for months, he'd said, while wiping soy sauce off the counter. It'd just be easier if my name was already on the deed. At the time, I'd brushed it aside. Now, sitting across from Ruth, my stomach twisted, remembering how smoothly he'd said it. Did you sign anything? She asked. No. Did he bring papers? I looked down into my coffee. Yes. Ruth let out a long breath through her nose. Oh, honey. The room suddenly felt colder. I stood and walked to the hallway closet where I kept old mail and folders stacked in plastic bins. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the envelope Daniel had left behind that day. I carried it back to the table with shaking hands. Inside were property transfer forms, not suggestions, not information, actual legal transfer paperwork. My own son had walked into my house already prepared. Ruth adjusted her glasses and looked over the pages carefully. These aren't simple emergency documents either. What does that mean? It means this would have made him co-owner immediately. I sat down slowly. There's a strange kind of sickness that comes when betrayal finally becomes undeniable. Your body understands it before your mind does. My hands went cold first. Then my chest tightened so hard, I thought for a second I might faint. All this time, I'd been telling myself maybe Melissa was pushing things. Maybe Daniel was stressed. Maybe I was overreacting. But people don't accidentally carry deed transfer papers into their mother's kitchen. Ruth reached over and touched my wrist gently. Evelyn, I think they've been planning this a while. I barely slept that night. Around 2 a.m, I walked out to the garage wearing my robe and slippers. Rain tapped softly against the roof while I stood there looking at Harold's things. His fishing tackle, his tools, the old Cardinals radio hanging by the workbench, 49 years of marriage sitting quietly in boxes while my son discussed storage solutions. I pulled open one drawer and found Harold's watch still wrapped in the little blue cloth he always used. Seeing it broke something in me all over again. Because Harold knew. Near the end of his life, after Daniel started visiting less and less, Harold once sat in this exact garage and said quietly, "Don't let that boy pressure you out of this house when I'm gone." I'd gotten angry at him for saying it. Now I understood why he did. The next afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced again. This time, Melissa came too. I saw their SUV pull into the driveway while I was watering the hydrangeas. Melissa stepped out first, wearing sunglasses big enough to cover half her face. Daniel gave me that tight smile people use when they're arriving for an unpleasant conversation they already rehearsed in the car. "Mom," he said, "can we come in?" I didn't want them inside my house, but I stepped aside anyway. Melissa immediately started looking around the kitchen like she was mentally redecorating it already. Daniel sat down heavily at the table. "We need to clear the air." I stayed standing. He folded his hands together. "You've been acting really strange since Mother's Day." Strange, not hurt, not humiliated. Strange. Melissa sighed dramatically. We're honestly concerned about your mental state. I felt my heartbeat stop for half a second. Then Daniel pulled something from his briefcase, a brochure. Not for assisted living this time. Memory care. I looked down at the brochure in Daniel's hands. Sunny gardens, smiling gray-haired couples, a woman in pink scrubs helping an old man button his sweater. Memory support, living. My mouth went dry. Melissa softened her voice instantly, the way people do when they're trying to sound compassionate while saying something monstrous. We're not saying there's something seriously wrong, she said carefully. But lately, you've been confused, emotional, paranoid. Paranoid. I stared at her, then at my son. And that's when I finally understood this had gone much further than money. They weren't trying to convince me anymore. They were building a case. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, you forgot Melissa's birthday dinner last month. You changed the reservation 3 times. You accused us of trying to take your house. You brought deed transfer papers into my kitchen. His jaw tightened. Melissa jumped in quickly. You've become very suspicious of everyone around you. I actually laughed then. A small, exhausted laugh that made both of them uncomfortable. You think I'm senile because I noticed what you're doing. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Nobody said senile. You brought me a memory care brochure. Silence. Then Melissa quietly said the one thing that turned my blood to ice. If a doctor agrees you're struggling cognitively, things could become much easier for everyone. Everyone. Not me. Everyone else. I looked directly at Daniel. Did you discuss putting me under guardianship? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I felt physically sick. My own child had sat somewhere discussing whether I was mentally competent enough to control my own life. The room blurred for a second. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, and Melissa immediately stood up fast. See? This is exactly what we mean. That did it. Something inside me hardened completely. Not dramatic. Not explosive, just finished. I straightened slowly and looked at both of them. You need to leave. Daniel blinked. Mom, now. We're trying to help you. No, I said quietly. You're trying to remove me. Melissa crossed her arms. You are not thinking rationally. I walked to the drawer beside the refrigerator and pulled out the envelope Ruth had helped me prepare that morning. Inside were copies of every document. The deed, my will, power of attorney papers. I handed them directly to Daniel. He frowned, opening them. Then his face changed color completely. What is this? My attorney updated everything yesterday. Melissa grabbed the papers from him. I watched her eyes move faster and faster down the page. Then she froze. Because Daniel's name wasn't there. Not on the house. Not on the authority forms. Not anywhere. Instead, there was one name listed repeatedly. Claire. My granddaughter. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped hard across the floor. You gave everything to Claire? Everything that belongs to me stays under my control until I die, I said calmly. After that, yes. Melissa looked furious now. Not hurt. Furious. This is manipulation, she snapped. That girl barely knows how to manage her own student loans. She knows how to love me without calculating profit. Daniel looked stunned. Honestly, stunned. Like he truly believed this could never happen to him. Mom, after everything I've done for you? I stared at him for a long moment. Then I finally said the thing I'd swallowed for years. You stopped loving me when I stopped being useful to you. The silence after that felt enormous. Daniel's eyes watered suddenly, but I couldn't tell if it was grief or rage. Melissa recovered first. "This isn't over," she said coldly. Then she grabbed Daniel's arm and practically dragged him toward the front door. But before they left, Daniel turned back toward me and quietly, almost whispering, he said something that made my knees nearly give out. "You have no idea what Melissa's family already invested into this house." After they left, I locked the front door and stood there shaking, not crying, shaking. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar to me, like somebody had walked through it measuring walls while I slept. Melissa's family already invested into this house. I kept hearing it over and over. Invested how? I barely slept that night. Around 4 a.m, I finally got out of bed and walked into Harold's old study. The rain had started again outside, soft against the windows. I opened the filing cabinet where Harold kept tax records and insurance papers. That's where I found it, a folder I had never seen before. Inside were contractor estimates, renovation sketches, refinance applications, and Daniel's handwriting. One page had numbers circled in red beside the words, "Future in-law suite conversion." My stomach turned. There were emails too, printed out neatly. Melissa writing to a contractor. "Once Evelyn transitions out, we'll finally have enough room for Mom long term." Another one. "The property value should double after updates." Not if, when, like my leaving was already guaranteed. Like I was already halfway erased. I sat there staring at those papers until daylight came through the curtains. 48 years raising that boy. I worked double shifts when Harold got laid off in 87. I skipped meals sometimes so Daniel could play baseball. I sold my mother's jewelry to help cover his college apartment deposit, and somehow I still ended up becoming an obstacle in his future plans. Around noon, Claire arrived. The second she saw my face, she said, "What happened?" I handed her the folder without speaking. I watched her read every page. Her expression changed slowly from confusion to disbelief, then horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. There was one email near the bottom neither of us had noticed initially. Claire found it first. It was from Melissa's mother, Francine. Short, casual, cold. Once she's declared incapable, the transition should move quickly. Claire looked up at me with tears filling her eyes. "Incapable," she said softly. I couldn't answer, because suddenly every strange conversation from the last year made sense. The doctor recommendations, the questions about my memory, Melissa correcting little details publicly, Daniel asking if I'd taken my medication in front of people. They weren't worried about me. They were documenting me. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. "Grandma, they were actually trying to take your house." I nodded once, very slowly. Then my phone rang. "Daniel." Again. Claire reached for it first. "Don't answer." But I did. I put him on speaker. His voice sounded tired now, frantic underneath. "Mom, listen to me carefully before you do anything irrational." I closed my eyes. Then he said the final thing. The thing that killed whatever was left between us forever. The paperwork for the renovation loan already went through using your property value as collateral. Some stories end quietly, but the damage stays with people for years. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and subscribe for more real emotional stories like this one.